Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Fall 2021 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. I'm now pleased to present the proposal preparation session. This session will be presented by Gene Feldman, head of the policy office, Randy Phelps, a staff associate in the NSF Office of Integrative Activities, and Nigamanth Sridhar, who is a program director in the Directorate for Education and Human Resources.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nigamanth Sridhar, and welcome to this session on proposal preparation. We have a panel of speakers this afternoon with you. We'll be joined by Gene Feldman, who's the head of our policy office in the Division of Institution and Award Support, and the Office of Budget and Finance and Award Management. We also have Randy Phelps, who's a staff associate in the Office of Integrative Activities and the Office of the Director. And I am Nigamanth Sridhar. I'm a program director in the Division of Graduate Education in the Directorate of Education and Human Resources. Next slide, please. So this is a session that's going to cover a wide range of topics, all the way from finding funding opportunities, the document that we at NSF fondly call the PAPG, or the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the types of proposal submissions that you can submit to NSF, the various sections of a complete NSF proposal, with specific mention and reference to the postdoc mentoring plans and the data management plans. One thing that, if nothing else that we leave from this session, if you want to take away from here, is as you're preparing a proposal, if you have questions, please ask them early and ask them often of your program officers or other folks at NSF. It's always better to ask a question early. You probably have an answer that you can receive from us. If you ask the question after a submission deadline, it's often too late and not all that useful to you. Next slide, please. So let's start with how to find funding opportunities. And the best place to find those funding opportunities is the NSF website. Every funding opportunity that NSF publishes is routinely published on the website as soon as they go live. So there's no advance notice that anybody else has aside from what gets put on the website. So if you go to the NSF website and click on the word funding up top, you'll see this page that you see on the screen here, which, as you can see, has links to browsing funding opportunities, finding them by due dates, and also doing keyword searches for what specific opportunities that you want to find. Next slide, please. So this is drilling into that page a little bit more. You can go in and search for funding opportunities either by the name or the theme of what you're looking for from a program area. You can also do a regular keyword search, like you were doing a Google search inside that search box. Both by the kinds of funding opportunities in terms of small, medium, or large grants. You can find them by topic areas. You can find them by specific keywords that might appear in a funding solicitation. You can also find them by what kinds of people you want to support, like graduate students or postdoctoral researchers or other kinds of equipment grants and so on. Next slide, please. Another really great tool that I'd like to introduce you to as you're finding funding opportunities is the award search tool. This tool is useful because it really helps you find the right kind of funding opportunity that you should submit your proposal to. And you can do that by looking at what other awards have been funded by similar programs. So let's say you have an idea, a research idea on a particular topic. You might want to go in first into the award search tool and type in those keywords into the award search tool and see all the awards that have been funded in that specific area. And then you can click on any one of those awards, and that page will show you which specific program funded that award. So it's a great way for you to associate a research topic that you have with specific funding programs that NSF is offering. Sometimes NSF loves acronyms and abbreviations that pronounce to real words, and as such, there is a chance that the specific funding opportunity you're looking for is a little obscured by the great acronym that we came up with. So this is a nice way to associate individual programs with specific research topics and research areas that you're interested in. Next slide, please. So another way to find funding opportunities that NSF has is the federal government-wide grants.gov website. So grants.gov covers all federal opportunities, not just NSF, but including NSF. So you can go into the grants.gov website and do a keyword search there as well. And the advantage of doing that is, in addition to finding the NSF opportunities, you may also find other funding agencies that have similar funding programs that may cover your research topic as well. Next slide, please. All right, so let's spend just a couple minutes talking about a document that's probably the most important document if you are new to applying for NSF funding. And this is the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. As you can see, there are two ands in this name. That means that it covers lots and lots of topics. It really is the ultimate guide for all matters related to proposal preparation, and really is the place that I, as a program officer, would send you to if you asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to right away. Right. This document is updated every year to make sure that all the items in the document are current for the particular fiscal year that you're submitting a proposal in. The publication number is always really easy to find. It's always the last two digits of the year -1. So the current PAPG that just went live in the new fiscal year is 22-1 for fiscal year 22-1. So it's always publication number 1 in every fiscal year. So it's really easy to find. When the website is updated with the current version of the PAPG as soon as the new document is published. There's two major parts to this document. Part 1 is the proposal preparation and submission guidelines. So if you are, if this session is of interest to you, then of course you're in the proposal preparation mode, and so that part 1 of the document is probably more relevant to you right away. Part 2 covers all award and administration guidelines, which means that when NSF makes an award to your organization, at that point, what sorts of rules and regulations should you be looking at? How do you take advantage of the various opportunities that you have from NSF to manage your award and so on? Next slide, please. So this again, the PAPG provides guidance for preparation and submission of proposals to NSF. So everything that you may have a question for is governed by this document. So any processes or any criteria that the proposal review will go through, how proposals may be reviewed, that is in terms of ad hoc reviews versus panel review versus review by program officers. There are various reasons for why a proposal may not be accepted, or the technical term for that is returned without review, which means that nobody outside of NSF will even see your proposal in terms of providing feedback or review. And there are also processes by which you, the PI or the submitting organization, could withdraw a proposal. There's processes for how proposals may be returned, and also decline notices that you may get if a proposal is not awarded. In addition to proposal preparation procedures, there are also policies to manage and monitor the award after it has been made. Both grants as well as what are called cooperative agreements, which are a different kind of a grant instrument that NSF uses. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing you the various kinds of funding opportunities that NSF has, and I'll start with the one that you probably are most familiar with, and that's called a program solicitation, the one in the middle there in the red. A program solicitation is a very specific set of guidelines, both in terms of what kinds of research topics are being invited by NSF for proposals, as well as how the proposal should be put together, and including things like limits on budget, who can submit, how many proposals can a single person submit, an organization submit, and so on and so forth. So a program solicitation is typically the most common kind of funding opportunity that NSF publishes. If you've submitted to the past, more than likely you've responded to a program solicitation from NSF. A program description is a broader. Both programs descriptions and program announcements are broader kinds of funding opportunities that essentially show the community, the field, a specific research area, and says NSF is interested in seeing proposals in that research area. Program descriptions and program announcements tend to be broader and not quite as specific with respect to the research topics that we're looking for, and all guidelines with respect to policies and procedures revert back to the PAPG. So anything that you want to see in terms of who can submit, what kinds of organizations, are there limits to number of submissions, all of those things are just pointed back to the PAPG. The last kind of funding opportunity that you see on this slide here is what's called a Dear Colleague letter, or DCLs. And DCLs are typically just notifications of opportunities or special competitions. In a lot of cases, a DCL may actually point to an existing funding opportunity, a program solicitation most commonly, but also other kinds of funding opportunities that may have been around for a while. But a DCL is a mechanism or a tool that NSF uses to essentially either remind the field of the existence of a funding opportunity, or to communicate to the field that there are some special opportunities or competitions that are open in a given time. So a great example in the recent past were a series of Dear Colleague letters that NSF published last year following the COVID outbreak, pointing different and various research fields to solicitations across the agency that had specific relevance to responding to COVID. Next slide, please. So what do you look for in a program solicitation or a program announcement? As a program officer, when a PI, typically a new PI, but sometimes also experienced PIs comes in and asks a question about, is my idea relevant, or is it, does it fit in scope? The default answer is to point them back to the program announcement or the solicitation, to go and see, read the solicitation carefully, and make sure that the idea that you have in mind fits, inside of the scope of the solicitation. NSF solicitations, tend to be broad, but they also have pretty nice clues and cues in terms of what kinds of research we're looking to support. Solicitations are never too old, if you will. They're constantly refreshed to make sure that the solicitations remain relevant and pertinent to the field as the field itself is moving. The primary things that you see in a program solicitation are: what is the goal of the program? What kinds of research does the program want to support? Who's eligible to submit, both in terms of individual eligibility for PIs and senior persons, as well as organizational eligibility in terms of what kinds of organizations can submit. And then the solicitation may also have additional instructions in terms of proposal preparation or award requirements. So you may have limitations on how many people can submit, how many people can be included in a proposal, or how much money you can ask for, and so on. To continue the rest of the presentation, I'm going to invite my colleague, Randy Phelps, to go to the next slide, please.
Okay, thank you, Nigamanth. My name is Randy Phelps. I'm in the Office of Integrative Activities within the Director's Office. So what I would like to do now is talk about some of the details about in the solicitations. Notice that NSF uses the word solicitation, not call or RFP, request for proposals. There's a distinction between all of those. So we'll stick with the word solicitation and go from here. So first of all, Nigamanth had mentioned that the PAP guide is usually updated every year, and the current one is 22-1 for proposals submitted for proposals that are submitted after October 4th or have deadlines after October 4th of the current fiscal year, the upcoming fiscal year. Solicitations are not necessarily updated quite so regularly. Here, for example, is an example of a program solicitation that is 18-529. So it was created in fiscal year 18, but is still applicable. If you notice the submission deadlines that are listed at the bottom, those will be regularly updated depending on how often the solicitation deadline occurs. So the deadline, the solicitation number 18-529 is something that you'll have to remember, or as in the case of whatever program you're applying to, what is the relevant solicitation number. Also of interest is which directorates and offices are providing funding for this opportunity. Remember that there are 7 research directorates at NSF and a number of different offices. So here, a good number of the directorates are providing funding for this opportunity, and also the Office of Integrative Activities. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at the solicitation, one thing that is of interest, because people will always ask it, is how many awards are going to be made and how much money is going to be provided for this funding opportunity. That information is part of the cover page of a solicitation. So here, for example, the number of awards funded by the program in a given year are listed here, for example, 1 to 3 in this particular case, and also the funds available to the program per year. So here, in this particular case, $8.5 million was expected to be provided for this opportunity in the current fiscal year. Notice that in all cases, the amount of funding that's expected is subject to the availability of funds. NSF is a federal agency and receives its appropriation of funds from Congress, and that, as you probably are aware, may take some time, even after the beginning of the fiscal year, which starts on October 1st. Next slide, please. Also of importance are the eligibility criteria for the particular solicitation that you would be interested in. So who may submit proposals is divided into 2 different categories here. One is as PI or co-PIs, and also the limit on the number of proposals per organization. So for the first case, who may serve as a PI, there are no restrictions. We rely largely on the institutions to determine who is eligible as a PI to submit proposals at that institution. So definitely work with your sponsored projects office to find out whether or not, if there's a question, whether or not you as a PI are eligible to submit a proposal. The limit on the number per organization, many solicitations don't have any limit per institution, but some do. One of my major responsibilities is the Major Research Instrumentation Program, and there is a submission limit per organization for that particular program, where an organization may submit only 3 proposals with certain categorizations. In that case, the organization has to do an internal competition to determine which PIs are going to be able to submit a proposal. So make sure that you're aware of that, and make sure you're aware of the submission limits per organization, if there are any, well before the submission deadline for a proposal, because there will have to be an internal competition at your organization if in fact the demand exceeds the limit that is listed here in the solicitation. And the limit on the number of proposals per PI or co-PI, as I mentioned. In some cases, in some programs, a PI can only be listed as a PI on one proposal submitted to a particular competition. There may be other criteria where you can be a co-PI on others or not, but this is all listed here in this section about who may submit proposals in the eligibility information section of the solicitation. Next slide, please. So an incredibly important section is whether there is a deadline and what that deadline may be. NSF programs are, in many cases, switching to a no deadline policy, where you may submit a proposal anytime during the fiscal year. So you need to be aware of that. This is proving to be an interesting way for the PIs to submit proposals when they are ready, not just when there is a deadline, and for NSF to better manage proposals over the course of the fiscal year. Not all programs are going this way, but some are. So please take a look and see whether there is a no deadline policy for your submission, and this will be listed in the solicitation. In other cases, there are things called target dates or deadline dates. And target dates are pretty much what they say, is that there is a target for when solicitation proposals should be submitted to the solicitation, but it is not a hard and fast deadline. So in fact, if you slip a little bit, proposals are likely to be accepted, will be accepted. But if you are beyond the target date too far, you may not make the panel date for that particular competition, and it may be held for a later review process. A deadline date is a hard and fast date that I want to emphasize. I get on my soapbox often about this. We are very rigorous. We are bound by policy as to what we can do if a proposal comes in after the 5 p.m. local time deadline. So please submit your proposal early. Again, this is where I get on my soapbox. I manage the major research instrumentation program, which gets about 800 proposals each competition. And it's remarkable how people submit at the very last minute. And that's not unusual for that particular program. But what you find is that for MRI is that 80% of the proposals are submitted on the last day of the deadline. And 50% of the proposals are submitted within 2 hours of the 5 p.m. local time deadline. What that means is that after the deadline passes, if you had a problem submitting your proposal, we cannot accept the proposal because of policy reasons. And it's not because we're just federal bureaucrats sitting in our office looking for reasons to not accept proposals. It's a matter of fairness. As I mentioned, 80% of the proposals come in the day of the deadline, 50% within 2 hours. All of those people submitted within the constraints of the deadline date. And for that reason, it's fair for us to accept their proposals and not accept proposals that come in later. So please take a look at that deadline date and submit early. I won't say submit early and submit often, but in contrast to ask early and ask often. But if you submit a proposal days in advance of a proposal deadline and print out the proposal that NSF has received, and you find a problem, you can update that proposal before the deadline date and the deadline time. But if that proposal is submitted after the fact and you find that there's a problem, there's nothing that we can do. So please, please, please submit well before the deadline and print out the proposal and look it over, the proposal that NSF has received, not the one that you think that you have submitted to NSF. Next slide, please. And now we have submission windows. MRI actually uses a submission window, and we started doing that a few years ago. It's a designated period of time during which proposals will be accepted for review by NSF. It's NSF policy that at the end of the submission window, the date converts to a deadline date. Okay, subject to all of the criteria that I just mentioned for a deadline date. So please take a look at the solicitation and find out when you're able to submit a proposal in a submission window and follow the guidelines in that solicitation. I've already harped on the deadline, so please be aware of that again, that at the end of the submission window, it converts, the date that's listed converts to a deadline date. Next slide, please. And there is something called a letter of intent. Some solicitations, for example, the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Excellence in Research solicitation, requires the submission of a letter of intent. The reason for this is it gives the PI an opportunity to tell NSF that you are planning to submit a proposal for the deadlines or the dates that are listed in the solicitation. And it gives you a chance to start thinking about it, but it also provides NSF with a way to better manage the review and panelists that might be required for a proposal. And it gives us an opportunity to know which PIs are thinking about submitting a proposal. And we can, in some cases, reach out to those PIs and provide some guidance on the solicitation parameters and how best to submit a proposal to the program. So we have office hours and or webcasts for prospective PIs based on the letters of intent. The criteria for the letters of intent are listed in the solicitation, so please take note of all of those things. There are certain things that are pretty standard in letters of intent. And one of those things is that when a solicitation says that letters of intent are required, that means that you cannot submit a full proposal unless you have submitted a letter of intent. So that is something that is important. Don't just dismiss it because it says it's intent. Well, at the time you didn't intend to submit a proposal and then you changed your mind. In most cases, then the letter of intent is actually a requirement for submitting a proposal. And if you submit a full proposal without a letter of intent, the proposal may well be returned without review. Okay. Next slide, please. And there's also something called a preliminary proposal. As I mentioned, there are programs that get hundreds and hundreds of proposals. That's a big burden on the program. That is at NSF for setting up panels, making sure that there aren't conflicts of interest. NSF is big on avoiding conflicts of interest. So, and you'll hear more about that throughout this grants conference. But one of the ways to help to mitigate that is through preliminary proposals. These are shortened versions of the full proposals that reduce the burden on the user community, that is the research community, in terms of submitting proposals by having less stringent requirements, for example, in page limits and what sections of a proposal may be required at this earlier stage, not just to express your intent to submit a proposal, but to give you a chance to have the elevator speech, if you will, to try and convey the importance of why you should be able to submit a full proposal without all the details that go into submitting the full proposal. Some programs use preliminary proposals. They still require a review in the merit review process, which you also will be hearing about. But they do provide a mechanism to have PIs not put in quite as much time as a full proposal, and a chance to convey as I mentioned, the elevator speech, the high level idea about why it is you should submit a full proposal. The thing is, once you submit a preliminary proposal and it's reviewed, you may be invited to submit a full proposal, or you may be discouraged from submitting a full proposal, or you may have an opportunity, well, it may be that you will be told that you are not able to submit a full proposal. Please take note of those things. If you are told that you may not submit a full proposal and you submit a full proposal, that will be returned without review. If you're discouraged from submitting a full proposal, well, you can, but be aware of the fact that the success rate, the funding rates for NSF proposals are not as high as we would like, or anybody would like. So if you're discouraged, that means that there are proposals that are likely to be submitted that will be invited, and therefore they are going to be perceived to be a much higher priority for the foundation, perhaps, than a discouraged proposal. So please take note of what response you get if you submit a preliminary proposal. And on that note, I will pass it off back to my colleagues on the panel.
Okay, so thank you, Randy. Now we're going to talk about the proposal itself and what components go into a complete NSF proposal. We'll start with what are called single copy documents. These are proposal documents that are provided to NSF just for NSF use only, and not to be provided to reviewers for merit review. So examples of these single copy documents are things like authorization to deviate from proposal preparation requirements. So let's say that a solicitation has a particular requirement, and you've been in conversation with the program officer or the agency, and you have authorization in some real form to deviate from those requirements. You can include that in here as evidence of that authorization. NSF also invites proposers to provide suggested reviewers to include or not to include. So you may know somebody in your field that is particularly well suited to review your proposal, or you may know people who you say should not be reviewing for whatever reason. You can give those suggestions to NSF. It's not a requirement that NSF will actually follow those suggestions, but we can use those. But we certainly will not provide those information to reviewers. Similarly, you may have proprietary or privileged information. The likelihood that something like this might appear is higher in programs such as our small business research programs or the technology transfer programs, SBIR, STTR, which are dealing with small businesses and startups and so on. And again, you can put those kinds of proprietary or privileged information in those sections. You may also have other certifications about your proposal or information about collaborators and affiliations that you share with NSF for the purposes of ensuring successful merit review, but NSF will not share with reviewers. So these are, again, pay attention in the solicitation because there are certain kinds of documents that are allowed as single copy documents, and some that are explicitly disallowed as well. So pay attention to those sections of the program announcement. Next slide, please. So this here on this slide is the list of all the required sections of a research proposal that you submit to NSF. Every proposal requires a cover sheet, a project summary, and a project description, or typically called the narrative. You need to submit a set of references that you're citing in your project description, a set of biographical sketches, the budget and budget justification, as well as a report of current and pending support that each senior person on the project has, a description of what facilities, equipment, and other resources you have available to conduct the research, a data management plan, and a postdoc mentoring plan, if applicable, that is, if your project is supporting postdocs. And we'll go through all these sections in detail over the next several minutes. But one note that I wanted to make here is that if a proposal doesn't contain all these required sections, the FastLane submission system or the research.gov submission system that you're using may not accept your proposal. And one plug, if I can make, is that the research.gov system is getting really good at providing early feedback to you as proposers and submitters about whether or not a proposal has all the complete sections and where there may be things missing and so on. So if you're submitting from an organization that is experienced in submitting to NSF, your sponsor research office probably has a wealth of information about how to prepare complete and successful proposals. If you're an organization that doesn't have a whole lot of experience, or a small organization that is new to NSF funding, ask NSF for help, and we will happily provide any help that you like in terms of getting a proposal ready. But like I said early on in this presentation, if you have questions, ask them often, but ask them early so that you can receive the answers and information in a timely fashion so that you can actually prepare your proposals. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of a cover sheet, when you go onto FastLane or research.gov to initiate a proposal, many of these boxes are actually pre-filled by that login process. So things like who's the PI, what kind of demographic information you may have submitted, who's your organization, those sorts of things are pre-filled, as well as information such as what program announcement you're responding to, is there a deadline for submission, what start date you want to use for your project, and so on. Those are all provided. The cover sheet is a really important document because that's what gets used at the earliest stages as part of proposal processing to make sure that the right people see your proposal. But by right people, I mean all the way from the right organization inside of the agency, the right program officers, and eventually the right reviewers to actually judge the merit of your scientific idea. Next slide, please. The project summary is a document that succinctly provides information about an overview of the proposal of the idea that you're proposing in your project, as well as what intellectual merit and what broader impacts your project will have. Quite simply, intellectual merit is answering the question of what new knowledge is your project going to create, and broader impacts is answering the question of how will society benefit from NSF having funded this project, right? So those are the questions you're answering. The project summary must contain all these three sections: an overview, as well as intellectual merit and broader impacts. And if you don't have all three, then FastLane or research.gov will actually not accept your proposal. By default, you're essentially providing this information in text boxes in the FastLane system or in the research.gov section system. If you have a project summary that has special characters, specialized mathematics, things like that, you can upload those as a PDF document as well. Next slide, please. So the project description is probably what you think of as the most important section in the proposal. This is where you're talking about the full narrative of what you're proposing to do, what the idea is, who's going to do the work, how are they going to do it, why they want to do this work, and how will you know if the project is successful, right? As well as what societal benefits are going to accrue when the project is successfully completed. A narrative section is a required section. Most NSF funding opportunities, almost all NSF funding opportunities, have a limit of 15 pages for the project description. Some have some programs or some solicitations may allow for longer project descriptions, and some other kinds of funding opportunities, such as the eager mechanism for exploratory grants, have a shorter project description requirement. So again, please look at the solicitation to see how long or how many pages you're allowed. But the idea of the project description is to specifically focus on, again, what the science is, but more importantly, or equally as importantly, who's going to do the work and how are you going to actually do the work. I want to also call attention to the broader impacts of the proposed activities. Again, all NSF proposals are reviewed and judged on 2 merit review criteria. There are intellectual merits and broader impacts, and every proposal must address both of those criteria in order to be successfully reviewed. Next slide, please. So a separate section in the proposal is where you're providing reference information. So the references cited are not included in the 15 pages for the project description. There's a separate section that you're providing, and you can use as many pages as you need to show all of the references that you're citing. And again, standard rules with respect to how you cite scholarly references apply for NSF proposals as well. Next slide, please. Every proposal must include biographical sketches of every senior person that's included in the project. NSF is has an approved format for these bio sketches, and you should be using those formats for communicating to NSF as well as to the reviewers that the senior persons on the project are both have the appropriate preparation as well as the right qualifications and support in order to actually complete this research. A biosketch is an essential part of each proposal, and this is the chance that each PI, co-PI, or senior person has to clearly communicate directly to the reviewers about why they are the right people to be conducting this specific research. And with that, to cover the next sections, I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues.
Well, hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Jean Feldman. I'm head of the policy office in the Division of Institution and Award Support. We're going to change gears a bit here, and now we're going to move to the budget section of the proposal. And what I always recommend folks do when they're thinking about putting together a proposal to the National Science Foundation is to go to Chapter 3 of the PAP Guide that's got our merit review criteria identified, as well as our merit review principles. And we're going to talk about that in greater detail in another session. But the important part about it is there's a series of questions that we're asking our reviewers to answer. And when we're talking about the budget, essentially what they're going to look to answer is, are there adequate resources available to the PI, either at the home institute organization or through collaborators to carry out the proposed activities? And so when you're completing your budget, the single most important question that I always get about putting this part of the proposal together is, how should I do it? What should I ask for? You should ask for what you need. what we are asking our reviewers to assess is if they were doing this same research, are these the kind of resources they would need to carry out that project? And that's why this portion of the proposal is so vitally important. We include also the ability, in fact, you have to also upload a budget justification. If you have entered a dollar value in any category whatsoever on that budget, you need to have a corresponding justification of why you need that in the budget justification, and you get up to 5 pages to do that for all years of the project combined. Proposals containing subawards, they're going to get their own budget justification up to 5 pages. Now let's go into the next slide, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the kinds of categories or some guidelines you may think about when you are putting together your budget. And one of the most important resources that I would strongly recommend that you utilize are your colleagues in your sponsored projects office. They're the ones that are most knowledgeable about the federal-wide guidelines on what is allowable, allocable, reasonable, and they can absolutely assist you in understanding whether things are realistic and reasonable. Obviously, as I just mentioned, they need to be well justified. Why do you need that? A reviewer may say, yeah, they need that piece of equipment, but that particular one they're asking for, they don't need that. You establishing that need is going to be critical to this process. One also has to understand that program solicitations may deviate from the standard guidance that we put in the PAP guide, and they say that particular categories of cost are allowable or not allowable for that particular program, or place perhaps limitations on the amount of funding that you could ask in that particular category. Well, what are the major categories of eligible costs? Well, obviously there's personnel. And NSF is very unique in that it does have a policy in place about the amount of time that may be requested. And it is basically senior personnel could ask for up to 2 months across all of their NSF funded projects. They can ask for more, or you can ask for more. But again, let's go back to that budget justification. You've got to justify why you need more time, and it's got to be included as part of the approved budget. Other things on this list, obviously, the equipment that you may need to carry out the research. Travel, you may want to be going to do the results at the Seminole conference in your area, and you want to go present a paper. Travel to that. Participant support is probably the most misunderstood of all of the categories on the budget. Participant support refers to costs for items such as stipends, subsistence allowance, travel allowance, and registration fees paid to or on behalf of participants or trainees, not employees, in connection with NSF-sponsored conferences or training projects. And so when you're thinking about that particular category, it's got to meet those conditions for you to be including it in the participant support category. And I will tell you that the participant support category does not encumber any indirect costs. There are also other direct cost categories such as subawards, consultant services, computer services, publication costs. And there is a lot of language in the PAP guide that we put in in very descriptive ways to help you better understand what those categories are and how they should best be used when you are preparing that budget. One other comment that I would like to make about the other direct cost section, because it does talk about subawards and consultant services. Let's just let you remind you that if you are doing a subaward to a foreign entity or a consultant arrangement to a foreign individual, you are going to have to follow the guidelines that we specify in the eligibility section of Chapter 1. But again, let me end this particular slide with use your sponsored projects office, use faculty members who have served as IPAs at NSF, because they're used to using budgets all the time and looking at budgets all the time. Also, look to faculty members who have served as on panels. They also can be very, very instrumental in helping you understand not only what's on that budget, but how that information is used. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk just for a little bit about NSF's cost sharing policy. Many years ago, cost sharing was a very, very big issue at the National Science Foundation. And as a result of that, the National Science Board made changes to our cost sharing policy that I'd like to kind of just dissect for you and make sure that you understand. So we have essentially mandatory cost sharing, which means you have to do it. You have to put an amount on line M as specified in the solicitation of cost sharing. It's an eligibility rather than a review criterion, meaning you either meet the bar or you don't. Many years ago, there were tremendous numbers of programs at the National Science Foundation that literally required that you cost share. We are down to a whopping 6. So those don't happen all that often, and they do go through a very, very, very rigorous review process before we allow them to include that mandatory cost sharing requirement in a solicitation. The two other categories are voluntary committed cost sharing and voluntary uncommitted cost sharing. And as we state on here, to be considered voluntary committed cost sharing, it has to meet all the standards of, and you're seeing this 2 CFR, 215, what's that? Those are the federal-wide requirements that all federal agencies have to follow in terms of the administrative requirements, cost sharing, accountability, etc. And it specifies that to be voluntary committed cost sharing, it has to be on the budget. And so NSF tells you that if you include voluntary committed cost sharing on the budget, say the piece of equipment is $25,000, and you say, but I want to lower that budget amount because I want to make it look more appealing to NSF. So I'm going to put $15,000. That is a violation of NSF's cost sharing policy because you put it on the budget. The true amount was $25,000. And so this is the reason that we're doing this, and the reason that it is so important is that we want to level the playing field. We want to make sure that everyone has the same opportunity. They don't feel like they have to cost share in order to get an NSF award. That being said, the third category of cost sharing is voluntary uncommitted. And organizations may, at their own discretion, continue to contribute any amount of voluntary uncommitted cost sharing to NSF-sponsored projects. Whenever you put something on the budget, even when you're not permitted to do so, please remember it is subject to audit, and that's a very important factor for you to remember. Next slide, please. The next section of the proposal that I'd like to talk about really goes hand in hand with the budget in terms of answering that question for reviewers. Are there adequate resources available to the PI, either at their home organization or their collaborators to carry out the proposed project? And it's an aggregated description of the internal and external resources that the organization and its collaborators will provide to the project should it be funded. You may say, for example, that we're going to give extra lab space in order to carry out this project because that's what it's going to take. We know that this project is going to take a lot of student support. So we're going to contribute X number of grad students to this project. Again, it's not considered voluntary committed cost sharing. It's not on the budget. But what a reviewer and a program officer can expect is if this project is funded, that those resources will appear. And that is critically important. It should be narrative in nature and must not include any quantifiable financial information. And if there are no other facilities, equipment, and other resources beyond what you've already put on that budget, then you indicate that section and then you upload that file into Fastlane or research.gov. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about current and pending support. Current and pending support answers very different questions than what I've just been talking about beyond budget and facilities, equipment, and other resources. We're using current and pending support to help NSF make good decisions about what it funds. Does the individual have the capacity to carry out the project as proposed if it's ultimately funded? And is there any overlap or duplication with what's already funded out there? And this section must be separately provided by all senior personnel. And it includes all resources made available to an individual in support of and or related to all of his or her research efforts. We go through and provide a lot of detailed information describing to you how this information is used, again, to assess capacity and overlap duplication, but also what kinds of information should be included in your current and pending support. We have recently put in June, and the table has been updated. We have put together a table entitled NSF Pre-Award and Post-Award Disclosures relating to the biographical sketch and current and pending support to help answer your questions about what should be included in current and pending support and what is not required to be put in current and pending support. Next slide, please. This is the table that I just described to you. And as you'll note on the horizontal axis, it talks about a whole host of types of activities that you could be performing. Anything from in-kind contributions that are used on the project being proposed. Where should they be included in the proposal? And as you could see here, the check mark is under facilities, equipment, and other resources. So this is a 3-page document that's basically a cheat sheet that lets you know this is the kind of piece of information and where do we want and where do we need you to include it in the proposal, in the biographical sketch, in current and pending support, facilities, equipment, and other resources, and even some post-award reporting that you may need to do and include in information that you provide to NSF. I would strongly recommend you use this as your cheat sheet, if you will, to understand better NSF's expectations regarding the disclosures that we expect you to provide in NSF proposals. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Randy Phelps, to continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now we get to the section of the proposals that are toward the end, the special information and supplemental documentation sections. So there are several sections within this category. One is what we consider to be the supplemental documents, loosely termed as that. The other one is a postdoc mentoring plan, if applicable, and a data management plan, which is something that is required of all proposals that are submitted to NSF. So we'll start. Next slide, please. I actually will use the word statements of collaboration because here, as you see, most people think in terms of providing collaborator letters. In most cases, we consider this to be a statement of collaboration. If I have one legacy at NSF, it will be having started this process in the major research instrumentation program and have it expand to various other programs across NSF and now in the described in the PAP guide. So a letter of collaboration is really a statement of collaboration that consists of a single sentence statement as followed here. If the proposal submitted by Dr. name to be determined, entitled in the proposal is selected for funding by NSF, it is my intent to collaborate and or commit resources as detailed in the project description or the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal. It must not recommend or endorse the PI or the project. Oftentimes, the letters of collaboration in the past were used to expand on the project description length or to provide, in some sense, a review of the proposal. And if we wanted those people to serve as a reviewer, we would ask them. But clearly, if they're listed as collaborators, they're conflicted. So the information there was not terribly useful in terms of just stating that what is described in the project description or the facilities, equipment, and other resources section includes what these people are going to be doing, and the statement of collaboration just acknowledges on their part that they understand that they are listed in the proposal and have a role to play. So please take note of that. All other collaborative activities should be described in the project description as noted here, or the facilities, equipment, and other resources section, such as the intellectual contributions to the project, permission to access a site, use instrumentation or a facility, offer to furnish supplies, materials, or research, logistical support, etc., and mentoring of students at a foreign site if applicable. Notice that there is a case, for example, where an organization may be required to provide some resources. So, for example, I'm an astronomer by training. If someone is building a spectrograph and it needs to be put on a telescope at Kitt Peak National Observatory, for example, the organization needs to provide, in some cases, in this case, probably, a letter on behalf of the organization stating whether or not the person providing the spectrograph is allowed to put that spectrograph on the telescope. In that case, you need to check the solicitation to see whether such letters are allowed, or contact the program officer to find out whether, as a supplemental document, such a letter of collaboration on behalf of an organization might be allowed. If it's just a person at the observatory who's committing their resources to help build the spectrograph, then that would be a statement of collaboration. So there are instances where a letter at an organizational level might be needed, but you need to check the solicitation and check with the program officer to find out whether those supplemental documents might be allowable. Okay, next slide, please. One thing that may be required is a mentoring plan for postdoc researchers. So this is a requirement that's been around for a long time now. And proposals that include funding to support postdoctoral researchers must include a description of the mentoring activities that will be provided to those individuals. Okay, and it will be reviewed as part of the intellectual merit and the broader impacts of the proposal, as is listed in the second bullet here. And proposals that do not identify a postdoc on the budget line, but do not include the mentoring plan will be prevented from submission in FastLane. So our system checks to see if you identify a postdoc on the funding line on the budget page, the system will check to see whether there is an included postdoc mentoring plan. So be aware of that. I will also say that there are very few programs that require cost sharing, and I again work on the Major Research Instrumentation program. If cost sharing is required and you're providing a postdoc through the cost sharing, it's very important to include that postdoc mentoring plan anyway, even though it won't be checked on the budget line of the NSF submission. But please do include a postdoc mentoring plan if cost sharing in rare cases is being used to provide for a postdoc. So an important bullet here in the last one is for collaborative proposals, the lead organization must submit a mentoring plan for all postdocs being supported through the entire collaborative process. So it's the lead organization that's responsible for submitting a postdoc mentoring plan. Next slide, please. So what goes into a mentoring plan? Well, just because the bullets are listed here doesn't mean that you have to check every box or that there aren't other boxes to check along the way, but here are some examples. Providing career counseling, training in the preparation of grant proposals. After all, postdocs may well end up being future faculty members. Today, there are many options for PhDs to provide career opportunities, but the expectation is that in some cases or many cases, these postdocs will get faculty positions and will be responsible for writing grant proposals in the future. So that is one opportunity for inclusion in a postdoc mentoring plan. Or training in responsible professional practices. Ethics is certainly something that is a big item in today's research world. So training in ethics is also something that can be part of a mentoring plan. Developing publications and presentations and practice doing all of those things is something that can go into a mentoring plan. And also techniques to improve teaching and mentoring skills. And also diversity, equity, and inclusion is also something that is something that can go into a mentoring plan and very well should go into a mentoring plan. It is an important part of research these days to make sure that opportunities are provided to a broad spectrum of the US community, for example, in terms of backgrounds, diverse backgrounds in disciplinary areas. So please make sure that mentoring plans consider that as part of their postdoc mentoring plan. Next slide, please. And the data management plan. So again, all proposals are required to include a supplemental document, a data management plan of up to 2 pages. And this too will be reviewed as part of the intellectual merit or the broader impacts of the proposal. And there are a number of proposals that I've looked at that reviewers have dinged the data management plan. And you don't want to have that happen when your proposal is going through an entire review and have you just say at the very minimum that we will manage the data or something along those lines. You have to be a little bit more specific than that in most cases. So the plan should include a description of how the proposal will conform to NSF's policy on dissemination and sharing of research results. So what that means is that the data will be distributed in a timely manner and at minimal cost, generally speaking. It is possible that you may have a project that doesn't require a data management plan, but you need to specify that as the statement on the section for the data management plan in order for the proposal to be submitted through the FastLane system. So it may include a statement that no detail is needed as long as a clear justification is provided. Just remember, this is part of the intellectual merit and broader impacts review criteria. So if you just state that a data management plan is not required, it may raise as many questions as with the reviewers, and you don't want to have reviewers raise questions. If you think that it's going to raise a question, it probably will. That's my also standard line of advice. So address those issues head on. So questions, next slide, please. About what goes into a data management plan are addressed on a website that's listed here. And in general, it describes what the dissemination and sharing of research results means, and what that means to, for example, the various directorates at NSF that have provided some information. As you will learn throughout this grants conference, there are policies that NSF program officers, NSF programs must follow. But within those policies, there are different practices that cater to the individual cultures of the various disciplines. As I mentioned, I'm an astronomer. Astronomy exists within the Mathematical Physical Sciences Directorate, which also includes chemistry, physics, materials research, and mathematics. Those different divisions within the Directorate of MPS have different cultures in how they address data management, for example. So if you have questions, as is often said here, talk to your program officer and find out what is expected. If you don't find information about the specific program or the specific division, contact the program officer to find out whether your idea for a data management plan conforms to what the expectations are within the various programs and divisions. Okay, next slide, please. So the mantra that you hear is ask early and ask often. And I say that not just because you will have many questions and the person that may well provide those answers is the program officer, but the program officers at NSF are rather busy, in many cases overwhelmed, I will say. So if you don't hear back from them, you'll have to ask often in order to get the response that you may need. That's what we're here for, to answer those questions. So if you don't hear an initial inquiry, just keep asking and hopefully you'll get an answer along the way. So there are a couple of ways to take this statement about ask early, ask often. But really, when you have questions, please make sure that you find out what the answers are through the program officers. But I will also point out that the sponsored projects office, the sponsored research office at your institution is also a first place to start asking some of those questions, because they have seen many of these proposals in many cases and will be able to address some of the questions that are not necessarily scientifically oriented, but in terms of proposal preparation. So there are a variety of websites to ask to find out information as well. You've heard and you will hear about a large number of them. Please, before you submit a proposal, one of my other pieces of advice is to get to know the NSF website, find out where things are located, proposal opportunities, what has been funded by the programs in the past, to see where you are thinking of applying for a proposal has had support from has supported the kind of proposals that you're thinking about. So there are many ways to do that, and we are here to help you. So please do ask early and ask often. So on that note, I will close and open the floor to some questions.
Okay, I'd like to welcome back my colleagues who have all been furiously typing answers to questions during the presentation. I see we've answered at least 116 of them during this session. So thank you all for answering those questions. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at those as the presentation was going on. We do have about 10 minutes left in the session, and we have a few questions that I'm going to pose to the panel, some that we've kind of figured out that these are easier to perhaps answer here rather than typing out long responses. So first question is, how can I engage an investigator from non-US institutions for a research project, and in what capacity can that be, co-PI or other senior personnel, et cetera?
I'll start it, and then I'll ask my colleagues and programs to supplement what I provide. NSF typically, we have tons of collaborations where US scientists engage with their international colleagues. Happens all the time. Typically, the way it works is NSF funds the US portion of the collaboration, and the host country of the foreign collaborator supports their portion. If it is necessary, however, and you believe it's necessary, the US institution, to have either to give a subaward to a foreign organization, or perhaps give a consultant arrangement to a foreign individual, we have identified in the PAP guide, in the eligibility section, very specific guidelines that you have to follow. You have to check boxes on the cover sheet. But what's most important, again, this is when NSF's budget would actually provide funding, and they could be, in a particular context, a co-PI. But there has to be a justification, an explanation of why the foreign counterpart is essential to participating in that project, why it could not be done here in the US, and why it couldn't be done more effectively by a US investigator. So there are some processes that have to be, and those justifications that I referred to, again, 1-6 in the PDF version of the PAP guide. But I will tell you that this goes through the entire review process. Our program officer looks at this and looks at these explanations. The review panelists look through these explanations. It's also sent to our Office of International Science and Engineering, and they look through these explanations. So again, it's not that we don't support them, but it is much more typical for NSF to pay for the US portion and for the foreign collaborator to have their host country pay for that aspect of the funding.
Okay,
Randy?
Was there anybody else who wanted to comment on that one?
I'll just chime in. Everything Jean said is spot on. But NSF encourages international collaboration.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, we welcome international collaborations. The US is part of an international community. We can't dominate every aspect of science and engineering. So we like to work, especially with our allied partners, to increase the scientific benefit of what we support here at NSF.
And there has been a lot of, obviously, press about research security, et cetera. And for international collaboration is absolutely critical and will continue to be critical to how the foundation conducts business.
Okay, we got a question, a long question, and about synergistic activities, and we get a lot of questions about synergistic activities in the policy office, and the question that we got is really kind of emblematic of the questions that we get, which are, here are my synergistic activities. Are these acceptable? So maybe the panel could talk a little bit about synergistic activities and what you want to see in there and what you shouldn't be putting in there.
I'm going to start, and then I want my colleagues to add to it, because this is a question that we get in the policy office a lot. What I want to focus in on is you really shouldn't be asking us that question. The bottom line is the biographical sketch is there to say, does the individual or team have the necessary qualifications to carry out the research as proposed? So we're not going to say one example is better than other. What we are going to say is what makes the best case to the reviewer and to NSF program staff that you have the qualifications and that those are your best examples that make that case. And so we used to give lists. If we give lists, what ends up happening are people just repeat those lists back to us. Rather, we would much rather have you make that case to us and to our reviewers as to why and how that demonstrates your qualifications. Colleagues?
So if I just actually answered another question in the Q&A that is pertinent to this one. The person asked, I'm from this one field, but I want to submit a proposal to this other field. The biosketch and the synergistic activities are the perfect place for you to show to the reviewers and to the program staff that says your degree may be in subject X, but the proposal you're writing is in subject Y. Why are you the right person to do this research? What in your background has prepared you to do this research? That's what you're answering, and that's what the synergistic activities in the biosketch come up to say there.
Absolutely. Well stated.
Yeah, and I'll just elaborate on what Jean said, only in the sense that when NSF does have bullets or lists of things as examples in a variety of different aspects of proposals, that doesn't mean to just repeat those. They are not an inclusive list of examples. There are other things that are important for your particular project. So for synergistic activities, figure out what is relevant for you, not necessarily what examples we're providing that generally cover not everyone.
Okay, so we got a lot of questions about very specific categories on the budget, and I'm not going to go through all of those, but I'm trying to pick out a few that I thought would be helpful for most people here. And one of the questions is about participant support costs. And the question is, if a student is receiving a stipend on participant support for doing research, can they be an employee in another department of the university that they're attending?
I'll take that one because that's kind of what I do. What we tell you is you shouldn't be an employee and a participant at the same time. And so we tell you, look at what the principal purpose of what it is that you are doing. An example of that I often give of where we're saying it would be okay to be both an employee and a participant is simply a case where a person is definitely a participant in a conference. Remember, that's what participant support. It's a conference or training activity. Great. You want them to be their perfect participant, but they also happen to work in food service and they give out food every day to other students. That is not something where we would want to stop someone from being trained as a participant in that kind of activity. But if they are really an employee working in a lab, they shouldn't also be serving as a participant on a training activity. That is not what we want to see. That is what you shouldn't be at the same time. So that's the bottom line in terms of how we would respond to that question. And if there are specifics like this, and they do sometimes, and I noticed as I was going, some of the questions, thank you, were wonderful, but they were so specific to a situation that you kind of worry about giving a single answer. But that's about the best way that I can answer that question. And if you have other specific questions, policy@nsf.gov, and we'll try to help you out more.
Okay, we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I do want to thank Jean and Randy and Nigamanth for joining us today. I hope you'll join us tomorrow. We'll have sessions covering the merit review process and award management. So please join us then, and thank you for coming today. Take care.